The crimson sun of Vega Prime cast long shadows across the training grounds as Drill Sergeant Kralvex emerged from his command bunker. His massive form moved with surprising grace for something that stood 12 feet tall and weighed nearly a ton. The Thalorian's 6 eyes swept the assembled recruits like targeting systems, each one capable of seeing different light spectrums that would blind lesser species. Kralvex's scarred hide told stories of countless battles. The jagged mark across his left shoulder came from a plasma rifle. On Kepler 4 for to be, the deep gouges along his back were gifts from the Razor-Clawed Nexari during the siege of Titan Station. Each scar was a lesson learned in blood, a reminder that the galaxy was not kind to the weak. Today marked the beginning of another training cycle, and with it, another batch of hopefuls who believed they could survive the Death Gauntlet. Massive Thalorian had been running this course for 30 years. Watching species from across the galaxy attempt what many considered impossible, his success rate was brutally low. Less than 15% of cadets ever completed the full course. The Death Gauntlet stretched across 3 square kilometers of artificial terrain, designed by the galaxy's most sadistic military engineers. The first section alone contained gravity wells that could crush bones, electromagnetic fields that scrambled neural pathways, and automated defense systems that fired live ammunition. It wasn't meant to be fair, it was meant to separate the warriors from the dead. Behind Kralvex, the Academy's other instructors gathered like vultures. Instructor Veltar, an Aquarian whose tentacles constantly tasted the air for fear pheromones, had seen more cadets die under her watch than any other trainer. Her species evolved in the crushing depths of ocean worlds, making them naturally suited to extreme pressure situations. She had little patience for weakness. Instructor Zephyra represented the crystalline Luxari beings of living mineral, who could survive in the vacuum of space. Her kind communicated through harmonic vibrations that could shatter glass, and their tactical minds processed information at superhuman speeds. She viewed organic life forms as inherently inferior, little more than soft meat wrapped around fragile bones. The assembled cadets represented the galaxy's major powers. Mighty Gorloks stood like living boulders, their stone-like skin capable of deflecting small arms fire. Veltari assassins moved like liquid shadows, their forearms equipped with natural poison glands. A group of insectoid hive-means chittered in perfect synchronization, their collective consciousness making them nearly impossible to surprise. Then there were the Christic warriors, beings of living crystal, who could reshape their bodies at will. Their current record holder, Shardsinger Velthan, had completed the Death Gauntlet in 4 days, a time that stood unbroken for 7 years. The achievement had earned him command of an entire battle fleet and legendary status among military circles. Most recruits took months to complete the course. They survived it all. The mortality rate hovered around 30%, with another 40% washing out due to psychological breaks or permanent injuries. The Academy's medical bay was equipped with regeneration tanks from a dozen different species, each one constantly occupied by broken cadets. But today brought something different. Something that made even Kralvex pause. A human stood among the giants. Cadet Tejo appeared almost comically small compared to his alien counterparts. Where the Gorloks stood 8 feet tall and weighed half a ton, this human barely reached 6 feet. His skin looked paper-thin compared to the armored hides around him. No natural weapons, no enhanced physiology, no obvious advantages that would help him survive what was coming. Humans were still newcomers to the galactic community. Their homeworld Earth had only been discovered 50 years ago when they launched their first faster-than-light probe. Initial reports described them as a relatively peaceful species with decent technology, but no particular martial prowess. They had been involved in exactly 0 galactic conflicts and controlled only a handful of systems. Kralvex's mandibles clicked in what passed for laughter among his species. The sound was like grinding metal, causing several nearby cadets to wince. In all his years of training, he had never seen a species look less suited for military service. The human's eyes were too soft, his movements too fluid, his entire demeanor suggesting someone who had never faced real hardship. Another soft-skinned instructor Veltar muttered, her tentacles writhing with barely contained disdain. The Aquarian's voice carried the wet, gurgling quality of someone who had evolved underwater. "This one won't last 10 minutes in the first chamber. Look at him, no armor, no natural weapons, no enhanced physiology."
What were the recruitment
officers thinking? Instructor Zephyrus' crystalline form chimed with harmonic laughter. "Perhaps they thought we needed entertainment. I give him 5 minutes before he's crying for his mother." The other instructors nodded in agreement. They had seen this pattern before, overconfident species, sending their best, only to watch them crumble against the galaxy's harsh realities. It was almost cruel, but the galaxy didn't care about feelings. Only results mattered. But Teho seemed oblivious to the mockery around him. His dark eyes remained fixed on the massive blast doors that marked the entrance to the Death Gauntlet. There was something in his gaze that Kralvex couldn't quite identify. Not fear, not excitement, but a cold, calculating focus that seemed oddly familiar. The human's breathing was steady, his posture relaxed, but ready. His hands hung loose at his sides, but Kralvex noticed they weren't trembling like most first-time cadets. Whatever this human was thinking, he wasn't showing the terror that usually preceded a cadet's first encounter with the Death Gauntlet. As the morning briefing began, Kralvex found himself watching the human more closely than usual. Something about Teho reminded him of the most dangerous opponents he had faced. Not the strongest or fastest, but the ones who adapted, who found ways to turn disadvantage into advantage. The galaxy was about to discover what happened when an entire species had been forged by adversity, shaped by a world that killed the weak and rewarded the clever. The Death Gauntlet waited, its ancient systems humming with deadly potential. Soon, everyone would learn what it truly meant to be human. The ancient blast doors shuddered as their massive hydraulic systems engaged, groaning like wounded beasts. Metal scraped against metal in a sound that made even the hardened instructors wince. Slowly, the barriers parted to reveal what lay beyond a chamber, designed by the galaxy's most twisted minds to break bodies and spirits alike. The first section stretched out like a mechanical hell. Massive spinning blades rotated at different speeds, their razor edges gleaming under harsh fluorescent lights. Each blade was the size of a shuttle wing, capable of slicing through reinforced titanium-like paper. The pattern seemed random, chaotic, but Kralvex knew better. Every rotation was calculated to create windows of opportunity so brief that only the fastest reflexes could exploit them beyond the blades. Crushing walls waited like the jaws of some metallic predator. They moved with hydraulic precision, slamming, together with enough force to flatten a battle tank. The timing was deliberately unpredictable. Sometimes they would pause for seconds. Other times they would snap shut the moment a cadet entered the space between them. At the far end of the chamber, pools of industrial acid bubbled and steamed. The liquid was so corrosive it could dissolve organic matter in seconds and eat through most metals in minutes. The acrid smell filled the air, making several cadets step back instinctively. There was no safe path across, just a series of narrow ledges that required perfect balance and timing. Kralvex massive claws clicked against his chronometer as he activated the timing system. His 6 eyes focused on the human, waiting for the inevitable moment when he would have to signal the medical team. The Thalorian had seen this pattern hundreds of times. Overconfident cadets, rushing forward only to become statistics in the Academy's grim record books. The other instructors gathered around the observation windows, their various forms of anatomy allowing them to track movement in ways human eyes never could. Instructor Veltar's tentacles twitched with anticipation, already tasting the fear. Pheromones that would soon fill the air. Instructor Zephyrus' crystalline form hummed with harmonic vibrations. Her alien senses cataloging every detail of what she expected to be a very short performance. Then Teho moved. The human exploded into motion with a speed that caught everyone off guard. But it wasn't just speed, it was precision. Where other species would have charged forward relying on their natural advantages, Teho seemed to flow like water, finding paths that shouldn't have existed. The first blade came down in a whistling arc that would have bisected any normal being. Teho didn't try to dodge backward or forward like most cadets. Instead, he rolled sideways, using the blade's own momentum to help propel him past it. The spinning death trap that should have been his end became his launching point. "Impossible," muttered Instructor Veltar, her tentacles writhing with confusion. "He's treating the blades like dance partners." The second blade spun horizontally, its edge carving the air at waist height. Taeho didn't duck or jump, he slid under it on his back, using the smooth floor to his advantage. As he slid, he grabbed a piece of debris that had been left from previous attempts. Never breaking his momentum, the crushing walls sensed his approach and began their deadly rhythm. Most cadets would try to time their passage, waiting for the perfect moment to sprint through. The mighty Gorloks would attempt to force the walls apart with their incredible strength. The Christic warriors would try to reshape their bodies to squeeze through smaller gaps. Taeho did none of these things. As the walls slammed shut, he jammed the debris he had grabbed into the mechanism at the last second. The metal scrap was barely enough to prevent the walls from closing completely, creating a gap so narrow that most species couldn't fit through it. But the human didn't hesitate. He twisted his body, exhaling to make himself smaller, and slipped. Through the opening like liquid mercury, the walls tried to close further, grinding against the debris with screams of tortured metal. But Taeho was already through, rolling to his feet on the other side as if he had done this 1,000 times before. "By the void," whispered Instructor Zephyra, her crystalline form shimmering with disbelief. The harmonic vibrations she emitted shifted to frequencies that indicated genuine shock. He's not fighting the course, he's dancing with it. The observation deck fell silent except for the mechanical sounds of the death trap below. Every instructor, every cadet watching from the gallery stared in stunned amazement. They were witnessing something that shouldn't have been possible, a being with no natural advantages, somehow thriving in an environment designed to kill the galaxy's strongest warriors. Now came the acid pools, the final obstacle of the first chamber. The bubbling liquid stretched 20 meters across, with only a series of narrow ledges providing any hope of passage. Most cadets spent precious minutes calculating safe paths, measuring distances, calling for protective equipment. The record holder had taken 47 minutes just to cross this section. Taedash Ho reached the edge and paused for exactly 3 seconds. His eyes tracked the available paths, calculating angles and distances with the precision of a computer. Then, he spotted a fallen support beam, partially dissolved by acid splash but still structurally sound, where other species would have seen useless debris. The human saw opportunity. He grabbed the beam, testing its weight and balance with quick, economical movements. The metal was still warm from the acid, but his calloused hands seemed immune to the heat. He hefted it like a pole vaulter, took 3 running steps, and launched himself across the entire acid pool in one smooth motion. The beam bent under his weight, threatening to snap, but Taeho had calculated the physics perfectly. He released at the exact moment of maximum flex, using the beam's spring back to add extra distance to his jump. He landed on the far side with cat-like grace, rolling to absorb the impact and coming up in a ready crouch. The chronometer read 15 minutes and 37 seconds. Kralvex stared at the display, his 6 eyes blinking in sequence as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. 15 minutes. The human had crossed the first chamber, a chamber that had killed dozens of cadets and broken hundreds more in less time than it took most species to even analyze the obstacles. "This is impossible," Instructor Veltar breathed, her tentacles coiling and uncoiling with nervous energy. No organic being should be able to adapt that quickly. But Taeho was already moving toward the second chamber, his dark eyes focused ahead with the same cold intensity they had shown at the beginning. There was no exhaustion in his movements, no hesitation, no fear. He moved like a machine built for this exact purpose. But with a fluid creativity that no machine could replicate, the instructors exchanged glances, each one beginning to realize that their assumptions about humanity might have been dangerously wrong. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when an entire species had been forged by a world that killed the weak and rewarded the adaptable. The death. Gauntlet's second chamber waited ahead, its challenges designed to test abilities that no single species should possess. But as Tejo disappeared into the next nightmare, one thing was becoming clear. The humans weren't just another species trying to find their place in the galaxy. They were something entirely new, something that would change the balance of power forever. The second chamber's walls hummed with energy. As Tejo stepped through the reinforced doorway, this section was completely different from the mechanical death trap he had just conquered. Here, the floor was covered in a strange, shifting metal that could change its surface texture in seconds. The ceiling bristled with holographic projectors, each one capable of creating enemies, so realistic they could actually harm you. The combat simulation was the Academy's crown jewel of training technology. Built using quantum processors and battle data from 1,000 different conflicts, it could recreate any enemy the galaxy had ever faced. The holographic soldiers weren't just images, they were solid, dangerous. And programmed with the actual fighting techniques of legendary warriors, Kralvex pressed his massive face against the observation window, his breath fogging the reinforced glass. His 6 eyes tracked every movement as the chamber began its deadly light show. This was where overconfident cadets met their match. The simulation had been designed by military strategists from 12 different species, each one contributing their deadliest combat techniques. Simulation beginning, announced the chamber's artificial intelligence in a voice that sounded like grinding stone. Difficulty level, nightmare. Survival rate, 0.03%. The first wave materialized around Tejo, like ghosts becoming flesh. 3 Thalorian shock troopers shimmered into existence, their massive forms identical. To Kralvex himself, each one stood 12 feet tall, armed with plasma rifles that could punch through starship armor. Their tactics were programmed from actual battlefield recordings. They knew how to coordinate, how to cover each other, how to hunt down smaller opponents. Behind them, 4 Veltari assassins melted out of the shadows. These weren't the instructors. Species. These were the legendary death dealers from the Veltari homeworld. Beings who could kill with a touch and move faster than most eyes could follow. Their forearms each carried different weapons: poison needles, molecular blades, energy whips, and neural disruptors. The final members of the first wave were 2 armored Gorloks, their stone-like skin gleaming with defensive energy fields. Each one weighed nearly a ton and could shrug off direct hits from heavy weapons. They moved like living avalanches, slow but unstoppable, programmed to crush anything that got in their way. Tejo stood in the center of this nightmare, seemingly calm as death closed in from all sides. Most cadets would have been screaming by now or frozen in terror, or desperately calling for the simulation to end. The human just watched, his dark eyes calculating distances and angles like a predator studying prey. The Thalorian shock troopers opened fire first. Plasma bolts sizzled through the air, each one hot enough to melt steel. The coordinated barrage should have vaporized any normal opponent in seconds. But Tejo wasn't there when the shots arrived. He had moved the instant before they fired. Reading their body language in ways that shouldn't have been possible, the human rolled behind a holographic pillar that the chamber's systems generated, using the environment to his advantage. But he didn't stay hidden. That would have been predictable. Instead, he did something that made every watching instructor take a step back from the observation. Windows Tejo grabbed a piece of debris from the floor and hurled it at the nearest Veltari assassin. The throw was perfect, striking the creature in the head with enough force to stagger it. But that wasn't the real attack. The real attack was what happened next. The massive Gorlak that had been charging toward Tejo's position didn't stop. When the human moved, its momentum carried it straight into the staggered Veltari, crushing the assassin beneath tons of living stone. The Gorlok's programming tried to compensate, but it was too late. One enemy was already down, destroyed, by its own ally. "Clever," muttered Instructor Veltar, her tentacles writhing with grudging respect. He's using their programming against them, but Tejo wasn't finished. As the remaining Veltari turned to face this new threat, he was already moving again. The human didn't fight like any warrior they had ever seen. There was no honor in his tactics, no adherence to the combat codes that governed warfare between civilized species. He fought like someone who had learned that survival mattered more than rules. A Thalorian shock trooper rounded the pillar plasma, rifle ready to fire. Tejo didn't try to dodge or fight back directly. Instead, he kicked a piece of metal flooring at the alien's feet, causing it to stumble. As the massive warrior fell forward, Tejo guided its fall straight into the path of another Gorlock's charge. The impact was devastating. The Thalorian's plasma rifle discharged randomly as it was crushed, the wild shot striking two more Veltari assassins. In seconds, the coordinated attack had become a chaotic free-for-all, with the holographic enemies destroying each other while Tejo danced between them like a ghost. "This is impossible," Kralvex growled, his mandibles clicking with disbelief. "No single being can manipulate a battlefield like this." "He's not just fighting them, he's conducting them like an orchestra." The surviving enemies tried to regroup, their advanced AI systems adapting to Tejo's unconventional tactics. But the human was already 3 moves ahead. He had noticed something the programmers never expected anyone to see: a slight delay. In the holographic projectors, when multiple enemies overlapped, Tejo used this flaw ruthlessly. He positioned himself so that the remaining Gorlak would charge through the space occupied by the last Thalorian shock trooper. For a split second, the holographic systems couldn't process 2 solid objects in the same space. The glitch lasted only microseconds, but it was enough. Both enemies destabilized simultaneously, their forms flickering as the quantum processors struggled to maintain coherence. Tejo struck in that moment of vulnerability, using a broken piece of metal to disrupt their projection matrices. The enemies dissolved into static, their deadly forms crumbling like mirages. The chamber fell silent, except for the hum of cooling projectors. The first wave was over, and Tejo was still standing. Not just standing, he was barely breathing hard, his eyes already scanning for the next threat. "Wave 2 initializing," announced the chamber's AI, its voice containing what almost sounded like uncertainty. In the observation deck, the instructors exchanged glances filled with growing alarm. Around them, other cadets pressed against the windows, watching in stunned disbelief. The impossible was happening before their eyes, and nobody knew how to process it. Near the back of the crowd, a new cadet named Soman gripped the rail with white knuckles. She was the only other human in the academy, having arrived just days before Tejo. Her dark eyes were wide with a mixture of pride and terror as she watched her fellow human rewrite the rules of combat. "He's really doing it," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the chamber's mechanical sounds. "He's actually doing it." The second wave began materializing, more enemies, deadlier combinations, adaptive AI that learned from the first wave's mistakes. But Tejo was ready, his human mind already calculating new possibilities. New ways to turn strength into weakness, and chaos into opportunity. The simulation timer read 37 minutes and climbing. Every second that passed was another small victory against impossible odds. Another step toward proving that humanity deserved its place among the stars. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when an entire species had been forged by a world that rewarded the clever and punished the predictable. The Death Gauntlet's most difficult challenge was becoming humanity's greatest triumph. The entrance to the final chamber stood before Tejo like the mouth of some ancient beast. Unlike the mechanical death traps and combat simulations he had conquered, this room appeared deceptively simple. The walls were smooth black metal that seemed to absorb light. The floor was covered in a strange, organic-looking substance that pulsed with a faint red glow. This was the Mind Shatter, the Academy's most feared psychological weapon. Kralvex watched the chronometer with growing disbelief. 55 minutes. The human had already shattered every record in the Academy's history. And now, he stood at the threshold of a challenge that had broken the minds of warriors from across the galaxy. The Mind Shatter didn't attack the body, it attacked the soul. "Initiate final sequence," the chamber's AI announced, its voice now carrying an almost organic quality that made several watching cadets step back from the observation windows. "Warning. Psychological warfare protocols active. Subject mental state will be monitored for permanent damage." The technology behind the Mind Shatter was ancient and terrifying, originally developed by a species that had long since vanished from the galaxy, it could reach into a being's deepest memories and turn them into weapons. The system would scan neural patterns, identify traumatic experiences, and then project them as hyper-realistic holograms that felt more real than reality itself. Most species had natural, psychological defenses, mental barriers that protected their consciousness from external attacks. The crystalline luxury could shut down emotional responses entirely. The hive-minded insectoids shared their trauma across thousands of individuals, diluting its impact. Even the mighty Tellurians had developed meditation, techniques that could shield their minds from psychic assault. But humans were different. Their minds were chaotic, emotional, unpredictable. They felt everything intensely, remembered everything vividly, and carried their pain with them like scars. The mind shatter should have been perfectly designed to destroy them. Tejo stepped into the chamber, and the walls immediately began to pulse with increased intensity. The scanning systems went to work, probing his mind with invisible tendrils of energy. Within seconds, they found what they were looking for: a lifetime of pain, loss, and failure that should have provided more than enough ammunition to break him. The first projection materialized directly in front of him. It was Earth, but not the peaceful world that humanity called home. This was Earth during the resource wars, when competing nations had nearly destroyed the planet fighting over the last clean water in arable land. Cities burned in the distance, their smoke rising, like funeral pyres into a poisoned sky. Tejo's face remained impassive as he watched his homeworld die. The projection was so realistic he could smell the smoke, feel the heat of the flames, hear the screams of the dying. Most beings would have been paralyzed by such a vision, but the human simply observed it with the same calculating intensity he had shown throughout the entire gauntlet. The system escalated, confused by his lack of reaction. The burning cities were replaced by something more personal, a military base under attack. Tejo watched himself as a young soldier, barely 18 years old, helplessly watching his squad get overrun by enemy forces.
Ow.
The faces of his fallen comrades were perfect, their final moments captured in excruciating detail. "Now we'll see him break," muttered Instructor Veltar, her tentacles coiling with anticipation. No being can face their greatest failures without crumbling. Tejo didn't crumble. Instead, he did something that made every watching instructor take a step back from the observation windows. He walked directly toward the projection, reaching out to touch the holographic face of a dead friend. His movements were gentle, almost reverent, as if he was honoring the memory rather than being tormented by it. The Mind Shatter's AI systems recalibrated frantically. This wasn't the response they were programmed to expect. The human should have been on his knees by now, begging for the visions to stop. Instead, he seemed to be drawing strength from them. The projections changed again, becoming more desperate. Now Tejo faced his greatest personal failure, a rescue mission that had gone wrong. Civilians he had been unable to save, children who had died because he hadn't been fast enough or strong enough or smart enough. The images were designed to crush hope and replace it with despair. Instead, Tejo began to move through the chamber with increased purpose. Each horrific vision seemed to fuel him rather than break him. His posture straightened, his steps became more confident, his dark eyes burned with a fire that grew brighter with each new trauma the system threw at him. "What is he?" breathed Instructor Veltar, her voice filled with something approaching. Fear. Kralvek's S6 eyes widened as understanding began to dawn. He had seen this pattern before, in the deadliest opponents he had faced during his long military career. The ones who got stronger as the situation got worse. The ones who turned pain into power and desperation into determination. "He's not being broken by the pain," Kralvek said, his voice filled with growing awe. "He's being forged by it." The revelation hit the massive Tellurian like a physical blow. Humans weren't just another species trying to find their place in the galaxy. They were something entirely unprecedented. Every other intelligent race had evolved on worlds that were relatively stable, where survival depended on maintaining equilibrium and avoiding extremes. But Earth was different. Earth was a world that had tried to kill its children for millions of years. Ice ages, volcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts, plagues, wars. Humanity had survived them all, not by avoiding hardship, but by learning to thrive in it. They were the only species in the galaxy that had been literally forged by adversity. The mind-shatter systems began to overload as they poured more and more traumatic imagery into the chamber. Tejo faced visions of nuclear war, environmental collapse, the extinction of his species. Each new horror was designed to push him past his breaking point, to find the threshold where human endurance finally failed. But that threshold didn't exist. With each new vision, Tejo moved faster, thought clearer, fought harder. The pain wasn't weakening him, it was reminding him why he fought. The failures weren't crushing his spirit, they were teaching him how to succeed. The trauma wasn't breaking his mind, it was sharpening it into a weapon. The other cadets pressed against the observation windows, watching in stunned silence as their understanding of the galactic hierarchy crumbled. These soft-skinned humans weren't the weak newcomers they had appeared to be. They were something far more dangerous, a species that had learned to transform weakness into strength, to turn every setback into a comeback. In the back of the crowd, Salman gripped the rail with white knuckles, tears streaming down her face. She understood what the aliens were only beginning to realize. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their tactics, it was their ability to endure. They were the children of a world that had taught them that survival meant more than just staying alive. It meant growing stronger with every challenge, learning from every failure, and never giving up, no matter how impossible the odds. The Mind Shatter's final projection materialized around Tejo, a vision of defeat so complete that it should have destroyed any remaining hope. But the human didn't see defeat. He saw a challenge to overcome, a problem to solve, a chance to prove that humanity belonged among the stars. With 58 minutes on the chronometer, Tejo began his final push toward the chamber's exit. The mind shattered through everything it had at him, every fear, every doubt, every moment of pain from his entire species' history. But each attack only made him stronger, more determined, more dangerous. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when an entire species had been forged by a world that rewarded the persistent and punished the weak. The Death Gauntlet's ultimate challenge was becoming humanity's greatest triumph. Nothing would ever be the same. The chronometer's display flickered as the final seconds ticked away. 59 minutes and 38 seconds. The number glowed like a beacon in the observation deck. Impossible to ignore, impossible to believe. Every alien eye in the Academy was fixed on that readout, watching reality reshape itself around a single, devastating truth. Tejo emerged from the mind-shattered chamber like a ghost walking out of hell. The reinforced blast door slid open with a mechanical sigh, revealing the human silhouetted against the chamber's pulsing red glow. His uniform was torn in a dozen places, dark stains spreading across the fabric. Blood trickled from a cut above his left eye, and his breathing came in measured, controlled gasps. But his eyes, those dark human eyes, burned with an intensity that made hardened warriors look away. There was no exhaustion in that gaze, no relief at having survived the impossible, only a cold, calculating fire that spoke of challenges conquered and greater battles yet to come. The Death Gauntlet was complete. 3 chambers of mechanized death, tactical nightmares, and psychological warfare. All conquered in less than an hour by a species that most of the galaxy considered barely above primitive. The implications hit the watching aliens like a physical blow, reshaping their understanding of power, strength, and what it meant to be dominant in an uncaring universe. The Academy fell silent. Not the quiet of respect or awe, but the hushed terror of prey animals realizing they were sharing the forest with an apex predator. Hundreds of alien cadets, mighty Gorloks, lightning-fast Veltari, crystalline Luxari, and insectoid hive minds stared in shock as this small, soft-skinned human stood bloodied but unbroken in the center of the course that had claimed so many of their kind. Kralvex felt his massive legs trembling as he approached, and for the first time in his long military career, he couldn't tell If it was from rage or fear, the trembling wasn't anger at being shown up by a lesser species. It was the bone-deep terror of a predator. Realizing it had just encountered something higher on the food chain, each step the massive Thalorian took felt like walking toward his own execution. His 6 eyes evolved to track the fastest enemies across a dozen different light spectrums. He couldn't quite process what they were seeing. This human should have been broken, should have been screaming for medical attention, should have been another casualty in the Death Gauntlet's long and bloody history instead. Tejo stood like a statue carved from living determination. His posture was relaxed, but ready. His breathing controlled, despite the obvious exhaustion. Most disturbing of all, he seemed to be analyzing the chamber around him, as if already planning improvements for his next attempt. "Cadet Tejo Kralvex," said, his voice barely above a whisper. The words felt strange in his mouth, like trying to speak in a language he had never learned. "You have ... completed the Death Gauntlet." The formal acknowledgement hung in the air like a death sentence. In 30 years of running this course, Kralvex had never imagined he would say those words to anyone, let alone a human. The Death Gauntlet wasn't meant to be completed. It was meant to find the breaking point of the galaxy's strongest warriors and push them just beyond it. Tejo nodded once, a simple gesture that somehow carried the weight of inevitability. He wiped blood from his mouth with the back of his hand, leaving a dark smear across his knuckles. When he spoke, his voice was steady, matter of fact, as if he had just completed a routine training exercise, "Sir, requesting permission to run it again tomorrow. I think I can do better." The words hit the assembled aliens like a plasma blast to the chest. Better. He wanted to do better. This human had just accomplished something that the galaxy's greatest military minds had declared impossible, and he was already planning to improve his performance. The instructors exchanged glances, filled with a mixture of horror and fascination. Instructor Veltar's tentacles writhed with nervous energy, tasting fear pheromones in the air, but not from the human. The fear was coming from everyone else. Instructor Zephra's crystalline form had stopped its usual harmonic humming, as if even her alien consciousness couldn't process what it had witnessed. They had spent centuries perfecting ways to break the strongest warriors in the galaxy. Their methods had been tested on every known species, refined through countless iterations, and proven effective against beings with natural advantages that humans couldn't even imagine. Now they realized they had been training the wrong species. Entirely from the observation deck, Soman stepped forward through the crowd of stunned aliens. Her fellow cadets parted before her like water, instinctively recognizing something dangerous in her calm confidence. She was the only other human in the academy. And suddenly, every alien eye was fixed on her, seeing not just another cadet, but a representative of a species they had catastrophically underestimated. Pride evident in her eyes. She spoke with the quiet confidence of someone stating an obvious truth. "That's what humans do," she said simply. "We don't break. We adapt." The statement was delivered without boasting, without drama. It's just a matter of fact observation about her species' fundamental nature. But the implications were staggering. If this was normal for humans, if this was just what they did, then everything the galaxy thought it knew about power and dominance was wrong. Kralvex looked at his fellow instructors, then at the dozens of human cadets who had just received their assignments to the academy. They stood scattered throughout the crowd, no longer looking like harmless newcomers, but like wolves disguised as sheep. Each one carried the same potential as Tejo, same ability to turn impossibility into inevitability. His report to headquarters would be brief and terrifying. "We haven't been testing them. We've been teaching them our weaknesses." The galaxy was about to discover why humanity had survived and thrived on a death world called Earth. They didn't just endure adversity. They were forged by it, tempered by it, and made stronger by every challenge thrown their way. While other species had evolved on stable worlds where survival meant maintaining equilibrium, humans had learned to thrive in chaos. Ice ages, volcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts, plagues, wars, environmental collapse. Humanity had survived them all not by avoiding hardship, but by learning to turn every setback into a comeback. They were the only species in the galaxy that had been literally forged by adversity, shaped by millions of years of challenges that would have driven other races to extinction. As Tejo walked away from the death gauntlet, other cadets parted before him like a tide. The movement was instinctive, primal, the same way prey animals cleared a path for an apex predator. But this wasn't just about one human's achievement. It was about what that achievement represented. The age of human dominance in the galaxy had begun not with conquest, but with one impossible hour that redefined what it meant to be strong. Not the brute strength of the Gorloks, not the speed of the Veltari, not the technological mastery of the Luxari, but something far more dangerous, the ability to adapt, to persist, to turn every challenge into an opportunity for growth. In the observation deck, alien cadets watched Tejo disappear into the Academy's corridors, each one silently recalculating their understanding of the galactic hierarchy. The humans weren't just another species trying to find their place among the stars. They were something entirely new, something that would change the balance of power forever. The Death Gauntlet's chambers fell silent, their mechanical systems powering down after their first successful completion. But the silence wasn't peaceful. It was pregnant with possibility. Heavy with the weight of a galaxy that would never be the same. Somewhere in the depths of space, human colonies were expanding. Human fleets were being built, and human minds were solving problems that had stumped the galaxy's greatest civilizations. The soft-skinned newcomers were about to show the universe what it meant to be truly dangerous, not through superior technology or overwhelming force. Simple, terrifying ability to never give up. The end.